Alright, hello. I think I'm live again. Today I'm just gonna be reading Mikey's article on McLuhan and Levinas. I gotta learn how to pronounce that better. McLuhan? I don't know. Dave and Mikey and people say his name all the time, but somehow I still don't remember how to pronounce it. Anyway, this I felt like reading after watching the stream yesterday, and imagine a lot of it they might have covered, but there will probably be more. And anyways, it's just a relatively quick article, so figured I ought to do that. And then because I really do want to, a lot of the conversations on the medium and McLuhan are very interesting to me, and I want to get more into reading him. And there's also some tensions I've noticed come up, or not, maybe tension isn't the right word exactly, but from like the kind of platonic perspective that Studebaker brings. He has talked about before how he doesn't think that thinking about questions of the medium really goes far enough to get to the root of some of the social problems we want to deal with today. And so yeah, that's just one little bit of something I can throw out as far as to keep in mind while getting deeper into this. But here we go. Millennials and Loneliness, McLuhan and Levinas on the phone. Yes, this is McLuhan and this is Levinas. Levinas, I'm pretty sure I say right, but many millennials are suffering from extreme loneliness. This was already the case prior to the onset of the pandemic, but coronavirus has made the problem even worse. All you have to do is Google millennials loneliness to see how much this is a thing. Lots of articles and YouTube videos have focused in on this sad state of affairs. Some millennials say that they do not have a single IRL friend, that is, a friend in real life. This is a unique feature of the generation as a whole. Not to say that this is true of every millennial, of course. Now, boomers and Xers certainly had their generational issues, but loneliness wasn't one of them in the way it is for millennials. The studies also indicate that this problem is affecting Zoomers, Generation Z, as well. But what's the cause of this problem? The standard answer is social media. I definitely think that's true, but I also think this needs to be viewed from a specific angle in order to explain the proliferation of loneliness. I'm going to argue that a combination of the work of Marshall McLuhan and Emmanuel Levinas can help us here. If boomers and Xers were able to cultivate close friendships that last a lifetime, then we must ask about the differences between their everyday circumstances and those of millennials and Zoomers. Friendship is always the product of communication, but there are a multitude of forms of communication. The form of the medium through which people communicate fundamentally shapes the communication itself. This McLuhanite insight is the lens through which I will be investigating the problem of the youth's loneliness. So this lens of the form of the medium being something that fundamentally shapes the communication. I do not want to imply that the complexity causing generational loneliness can altogether be solved with a single easy fix. But I also think that there is something young people could start to do that would really help them. So yes, I do want to offer a piece of advice. The experts recommend using less and less social media, as this has been shown to reduce feelings of isolation, alienation, depression, and loneliness. But this reduction in and of itself doesn't do anything to help the youth actually make meaningful friendships. I advise that the youth start having conversations on the phone. Now, if you're a millennial or a Zoomer struggling with extreme loneliness, then your initial reaction to my advice may be to laugh it off as being generationally out of touch. I'm going to interrupt myself here just to point out, give some credit to Mikey just for saying, because how far he really, because like in this article, he's not, I can see that he's not just going to be explaining one theorist, McLuhan, but also apparently he's going to bring in Levinas, so two major theorists that he's going to make concepts accessible, put them in dialogue, and beyond that, actually apply it to a contemporary conversation and use that to go farther the conversation, add a new insight into this contemporary conversation. And so it's like I get like I like why I get why they we'll talk about this being like the Mikey, by they I mean Dave, I think mostly in this case we'll talk about the Mikey standard, and which is just not just for like the level of detail and effort he'll put into his own readings, but like using writing to actually make an intervention and not just spin his wheels doing like kind of academic or scholastic repetition and of the anyway, just trying to emphasize to myself what makes this writing good. So I'll continue now. Now, if you're a millennial or zoomer struggling with extreme loneliness, then your initial reaction to my advice might be to laugh it off as being generationally out of touch. However, just hear me out before you hit me with the okay boomer. This advice is more philosophically nuanced than meets the eye. I'm not going to tell you to up and stop using social media, or to even decrease how much you use it, though still a good idea. I understand that your lives are utterly entangled in it, and that getting it out of your life is virtually impossible. Instead of telling you to negate your social media activity, I think you should start by supplementing it with phone conversations. The question I know many of you are asking is, why in the hell should I talk on the phone? Fair question. I'll tell you why. Marshall McLuhan was a Canadian thinker who pioneered the field of media studies. What Freud was to psychoanalysis, McLuhan was to media studies. But what exactly is meant by media? We're talking about the various forms or modes of communication. For example, speech and writing are two different forms that we communicate through. Speech is a specific medium, and so is writing. McLuhan's fundamental insight was that media are not neutral in relation to the messages communicated through them. The unique structure or form of a given medium actually affects and shapes the way messages impact human beings. McLuhan famously encapsulated this idea in the phrase, "the medium is the message." Much confusion hovers around that statement. However, all it takes to see that a medium form is never neutral in relation to its message, content, is to consider the following example. Imagine you are in love, but have not yet said "I love you" to your lover. The medium in which you choose to express this message will greatly shape how it affects the one you are in love with. There is a world of difference between saying "I love you" for the first time in speech, in person, and posting it on Facebook, or saying it on TV, or on the radio, or writing it in a text message, or writing it in a handwritten letter. If media were neutral or indifferent toward the message, then there would be no major differences in how those three words affect a person. Oh, but there are big differences between them. Yes, indeed, the medium is the message. Yes, of course, in a sense, the message is the same across various media. The three words "I love you" in abstraction are obviously identical, but in another sense, they are different. The structural features of a given medium have a huge impact on the meaning of the message. Even before we get any farther, like the thing I'm thinking about is that, like, even while just speaking out loud, the way you emphasize certain words will change the meaning of what you're saying. You can say something sarcastically. You could say it seriously. You could say, or you could you could choke it out, like I love you, like communicate, like a really nervous like confession, I guess. Or that's different than saying it confidently. And so these are like, so structural features of like speech are things like, there's the phonetics and like what I do with my mouth to produce sound, and differences in that. And then like that, I mean, there's whole realms of that, I guess. But so obvious, and so those kind of techniques that you use when speaking to emphasize different features of a message, or to just change the meaning entirely, those mechanisms are not present when I'm communicating by typing or some other way. So like on the internet, a lot of people will do like /s to suggest sarcasm, but this doesn't really, like, it makes you can't. I mean, people will do that because they'll be like, oh, sarcasm doesn't get across over text. And first of all, like, I think that's not true. Obviously, sarcasm can be gotten. You can get sarcasm across with over text if you're a good writer, and if you can, like, trust your audience to be media literate. And often, I mean, a lot of the time you can't, I guess. And so that's maybe it's a whole complicated thing. But my point is, like, there's a big difference between writing something that's sarcastic and writing something with a /s to suggest sarcasm. So, but people end up doing that because we're aware, but like the same kind of the structural features of speech that we have available of speech and like spoken language that suggest sarcasm aren't available when you're writing. And so, but there are other tools you can use to produce different effects as well. And by produce effects, I guess I just mean like communicate meaning, communicate some kind of meaning. And so this opens up the question for me of like, do the different structural features in different mediums, like is there an equivalent between spoken sarcasm and textual sarcasm? And we just have to use different techniques to get to that same meaning? Or is there like a fundamental gap, like a rupture in meaning between different mediums? And maybe it's both sometimes. Maybe there are some kinds of messages that can be communicated through different mediums, while there are other messages that can only be communicated through a particular medium. And I don't know, but I want to think about that more. So I'm going to keep reading now. We can stand back and think about the message in abstraction and see it as the same. Whether spoken, written, texted, etc., I love you is the same, but not so when concretely filtered through a specific medium. It's the differences between the structural effects media have on messages that McLuhan was interested in. A medium is, therefore, an environment or context that affects human beings and their bodies in unique ways. The form of speech itself, not its content, creates an environment of communication totally different from the communicative environment Facebook has produced. The various social media platforms are not reducible to one another. That is, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. all structure communication in different ways and must be investigated on their own terms. McLuhan's masterpiece is undoubtedly understanding media, and in it he had a lot of interesting things to say about the telephone. Let's have a look at what he said about the medium of the phone. Since all media are fragments of ourselves extended into the public domain, The action upon us of any one medium tends to bring the other senses into play in a new relation. As we read, we provide a soundtrack for the printed word. As we listen to the radio, we provide a visual accompaniment. Why can we not visualize while telephoning? At once the reader will protest, but I do visualize on the telephone. When he has a chance to try the experiment deliberately, he will find that he simply can't visualize while phoning, though all literate people try to do so, and therefore believe they are succeeding. But that is not what most irritates the literate and visualizing Westerner about the telephone. Some people can scarcely talk to their best friends on the phone without becoming angry. The telephone demands complete participation, unlike the written and printed page. Any literate man resents such a heavy demand for his total attention, because he has long been accustomed to fragmentary attention. Similarly, literate man can learn to speak other languages only with great difficulty, for learning a language calls for participation of all the senses at once. On the other hand, our habit of visualizing renders the literate Westerners helpless in the non-visual world of advanced physics. Only the visceral and audile tactile Teuton and Slav have the needed immunity to visualization for work in the non-Euclidean math and quantum physics. Were we to teach our math and physics by telephone, even a highly literate and abstract Westerner could eventually compete with the European physicists. It's one thing that's before we get into Mikey unpacking this quote, something that just jumps out to me is how he's talking about like the negative of what we can't do while telephoning. He's asserting that we cannot visualize while telephoning, and pointing and so we can look at that because it demands our complete focus. I think that's like these are related, but so there's like this kind of negative explanation, like something that telephoning does not allow. And then there's also the demanding our complete focus. And another like thing though, I think that besides the visualizing is that like when I'm speaking to someone in person, I can actively do things through my body language and through like facial gestures and hand gestures, like to communicate the extent to which they have my attention. And so I can signal maybe by kind of looking off to the side, looking up and down, standing closer or farther away, like the distance to which all these all do something to communicate like to what degree I'm committed to paying attention to them, to what degree I'm there with them in the conversation. And since you can't do that while telephoning, you like if you start trailing off on the telephone, it's just like there's less of like a permissible boundary. You're either there on the phone and having the conversation, or you're not. Like, because otherwise it's really rude to just have someone on the phone with you and then you're not listening to them because they're at the other end of the phone. They don't know what you're doing. They expect you to be paying attention. And there's a lot going on, but it's interesting to obviously this, like, it seems really clear in my experience that there is this difference with being on the phone where it does demand more attention. But so it's interesting to think through why that is. So let's see what Mikey has to say about it in the rest of his quote. This is overflowing with profound discernments, but I want to draw your attention to two in particular. First, the telephone is a deeply personal, intimate, and emotional medium which demands that we devote our full attention to the other person's speech. This is a structural feature of the telephone that differentiates it from the structures belonging to print, writing, texting, etc. Second, the phone forces us to suspend our inclination towards visualization, the primacy of the visual. Our default setting is one that prioritizes visual experience over the other four types of it: sound, touch, taste, smell. But the phone actually brackets out the visual experience of the person on the other end of the call. Each is a pure voice for the other, and this shifts us into the primacy of auditory experience. Each person becomes pure voice, and this is what is so important about the phone's formal environment or structural context. McLuhan, therefore, has a certain Levinasian take on the telephone insofar as he recognized that it opens up a space that facilitates a very intimate encounter with the other, another person. Right, so when he's talking about like each person becomes pure voice, and this is what's so important of the phone's formal environment or structural context, like that I'm reading is like getting at like what I was trying to point to too about there being all when you're talking to someone in person, you have your body available as well to communicate parts like other elements of the message, and so because the phone brackets out the visual experience of the person on the other end. All right. So now on to Levinas. Emmanuel Levinas was a French philosopher who sought to make ethics the foundation of philosophy. Most philosophers tend to make ontology or logic the foundation, but Levinas saw things very differently and presented his thoughts in a book called Totality and Infinity. According to him, reason, truth, being, knowledge, objectivity, etc., ultimately rely on a fundamental ethical experience. It's only after one has experienced the face of the other that one gains a sense of right and wrong. Totality and Infinity centers around this primary experience, the ethical face-to-face encounter of the other. Ethics has an experiential or phenomenological foundation, which is the presence of another human being in all of his or her own most and irreducible singularity. This face is not the literal face of the other person, a collection of visual features, but rather the other's infinite integrity. The face Levinas is referring to is invisible. As he said, the best way of encountering the other is not even to notice the color of his eyes. When one observes the color of the eyes, one is not in social relationship with the other. However, he also says, ethics is an optics, but it is a vision without image, bereft of the synoptic and totalizing objectifying virtues of vision, a relation or an intentionality of a wholly different type. Of course, we mustn't be too literal with this optics. In the Levinasian sense, a blind person can see the face of the other just as easily as someone with 20/20 vision, and in fact, the blind can more easily see the face. While the face is strongly associated with the actual face, it mustn't be identified with it. Think of the face Levinas is describing as the infinite depth and integrity of the other, and one can encounter this presence through sound and touch. However, the visual experience of the other is emphasized due to the fact that vision is the primary sense for human beings. What is so special about the telephone is how it enables us to see the other without any visual perceptions getting in the way. This subtraction of the actual visible features of the other is precisely what helps to enable a profound ethical encounter. The key Levinasian point is that the visual experience of the other is not like the common experience of an object or a piece of equipment. Vision cannot capture the other in the form of a concept, impression, or summary. The other always slides out of my categorizations. Levinas seems to be taking Kierkegaard's famous quip and running with it. Once you label me, you negate me. To highlight certain aspects of the other in the form of a concept is to simultaneously conceal and mask his or her infinite depth. This is why the book is called Totality and Infinity. Totality refers to how we attempt to totalize the other for a conceptual reduction, to fit the other into certain categories, whereas infinity refers to that inexhaustible, transcendent, and uncategorizable depth of the other. Levinas argues that speech is essential to the ethical encounter of the other. In his great commentary on Totality and Infinity, William Large writes, "The everyday experience of the irreducible singularity of the other, who calls into question my existence, and which is the source of justice in the world, is speech. Not the thought or description of speech, but speaking itself. Not the thought or description of speech, but speaking itself. The difference between an indirect speech that speaks about something and direct speech that speaks to someone." He then goes on to say, "Language is not first of all a description of the world, but generosity and openness to the other. The presence of the other calls into question my enjoyment of my world and their presence in speech. Of course, I am free to ignore this interruption, but even this is a recognition of their presence." Levinas makes a distinction between the saying and the said. The said is the actual linguistic content the other says, whereas the saying is the actual act of speaking. There is a difference between what is said and the act of saying it. The saying is what is of crucial importance for Levinas, since it is the very act of expression, the presence of the face in speech, that we have a revelatory encounter, that it is in the very act of expression, the presence of the face in speech, that we have a revelatory encounter of the other's infinity. The ethical moment or surplus is not the words the other speaks, but the way in which the other speaks. This does not have to do with the tone or force of the speech, but how the other is present in speech. Levinas calls it signification or signifying. In French, signification and significance. We need to distinguish this presence of the other in speech from the division of the sign into the signifier. The signifier refers to the word itself, like the word cat, and the signified what is represented in that word, the idea of the cat. What Levinas means by signification or signifying refers to neither of these elements. It has nothing at all to do with signs. It is rather a very utterance itself, or more precisely the presence of the speaker in their speech, that they attend the words they speak. It is this attention that is the ethical surplus of language. The presence of the other in speech gives this medium a distinctively ethical structure. Levinas, like McLuhan, finds a sharp difference between speech and writing. Large explains, "This is the difference between writing and speech. In writing, the same and other are equivalent. In writing, I use concepts and categories and treat every person as belonging to the same totality. All the great systems of thought are the products of writing. It is only in speech that I can have this direct exposure to the other who resists my own conceptualization. I might write of this experience later, but even then the actual experience would be lost, because as soon as I attempt to describe it, it would vanish in the very words I use. What the written word lacks is the very presence of the other in the words they speak. for even if I might attempt to imagine the author who has written them, the words I am now reading are testimony to their absence. Here's what's important in relation to millennial Zoomer loneliness. What was just said about writing is even more true of texting. Of course, writing and texting are two totally different media forms which are not reducible to one another. At least in the written word, there is a trace of the other's singularity in the form of the style of his or her handwriting. Texting even erases this trace of the other. Given its so this isn't even there are ways that this is not true. Like if you're online enough, especially if you're online in the right places, in probably the wrong places, the wrong kind of online spaces is the way I should say it actually. But in certain online spaces, if you very much know that about the idea of like texting quirks. People do try to but the reason that kind of phenomenon exists and why maybe it can be so it can have this like cringe associated with it is precisely because it's like a response to the lack of or this insufficiency in texting, and so it's like a very artificial. I don't know if artificial is the right kind of word, but like you really have to go out of your way to add some style, some like personal style or voice to how you text when it's like short form texting, like on a cell phone or similar. So yeah. Texting even erases this trace of the other. Given its impersonal structure, texting can be viewed as the opposite of talking on the phone. When we read McLuhan's analysis of the telephone through Levinas's description of speech, it becomes clear why the telephone can be so productive of long-lasting friendships and why texting is not. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek provides a brilliant description of our current media landscape, that is, cyberspace. Traces of Gnosticism are clearly discernible even in today's cyberspace ideology. The cyberspace dream of the self, freed from its attachment to its natural body, by turning itself into a virtual entity, floating from one to another contingent and temporary embodiment, is the scientific technological realization of the Gnostic dream of the self, getting rid of the decay and inertia of the material reality. No wonder that the philosophy of Leibniz is one of the predominant philosophical references of cyberspace theorists. Leibniz conceived the universe as composed of monads, microscopic substances, each of which lives in its own self-enclosed inner space, with no windows onto its environs. One cannot miss the uncanny resemblance between Leibniz's monadology and the emerging cyberspace community in which global harmony and solipsism strangely coexist. That is to say, does our immersion in cyberspace not go hand in hand with our reduction to a Leibnizian monad, which, although without windows that would directly open up to external reality, mirrors in itself the entire universe? More and more, we are monads with no direct windows onto reality, interacting alone with the PC screen, encountering only virtual simulacra, and yet immersed more than ever in the global network, synchronously communicating with the entire globe, from How to Read Lacan. The Levinasian encounter of the face of the other in speech shatters our digital isolation brought on by cyberspace. This encounter serves to produce a sense of responsibility and duty towards the other precisely through registering his or her vulnerability. This all sounds a bit abstract, so let's engage in a very brief description of the phone call, a phenomenology of the medium. We're going to do a phenomenology of the medium. Throughout my life, I've made about 10 close friendships, and they all have one thing in common: long phone conversations. In the last few years, I've become close with someone I first met on Facebook. I know that it can be very awkward to go from only texting to asking someone to talk on the phone, but Facebook actually provides us with a go-between. In Messenger, you can send short voice messages. This is how my friend and I began talking. I wonder if he's talking about Dave here, or another, who knows. We got used to sending voice messages to each other on a daily basis, and this naturally developed into us having actual phone conversations. If we had never started talking on the phone, then we would have never established a meaningful friendship, and we both know this to be true. The reason why is because of the intimacy and privacy this medium establishes. As McLuhan put it, the telephone, intimate and personal, is the most removed of any medium from the PA form. Thus wiretapping seems even more odious than the reading of other people's letters. When you're on the phone, the world around you tends to fade away, and you find yourself submerged in the all-encompassing presence of the other's voice. As you both lose yourselves in each other's speech, you become attuned to the other's singularity, or, as we put it in everyday language, you experience the other as a person. The more you talk, the more bullshit chit-chat is drained out of the conversation. The more the other shares his or her personal desires, fantasies, traumas, joys, etc., the more you share yours. On the other hand, you experience the other as a singular person that transcends all of your preconceived notions. But on the other, you also start to build long-lasting bonds through listening to the other's speech and lovingly embracing it. And, from his or her perspective, the other does the same for you. Of course, literal face-to-face speech can produce social bonds, but the phone is unique for how it subtracts visual experience from speech. Both McLuhan and Levinas were concerned with visualization. For McLuhan, it's a way of keeping the other at a distance, of maintaining a strong and protective inner space. And for Levinas, literal visual experience can actually prevent us from seeing the face of the other. Visualization itself can involve a strange sort of prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia. Might explain what that means. A neurological condition characterized by the inability to recognize faces. Face blindness. Okay. So, for McLuhan, visualization is a way of keeping the other at a distance, of maintaining a strong and protective inner space. And a literal visual experience can actually prevent us from seeing the face of the other. Because like visualization totalizes the other. Like, it's like this image of the other is the other. It totalizes them into that image, when obviously for Levinas, it's the other is not, can't be, the actual other is an infinity. Like the actual other is not totalizable. So visualization can involve a strange sort of face blindness. As in, like, oh, I see the face of it. Like, I see this person. That's what they are. I see them as they are, instead of like acknowledging the actual face of the other, which has a kind of unlimited, or it's but is not totalized. There's always something else beyond what, or back to the saying versus the said. The once it's like making the other into the said, or I guess maybe we could put it like it's like the scene. Visualization makes the other into the scene versus seeing. Like when you're coming into, I wonder if they've. I like putting it like this. So I wonder if that's right, or if they've already, if anyone else has coined it this way, because it seems like you could do a very similar parallel there between the saying, the said, and the seeing and the seen. Anyway, I want to make a note of that. The phone suspends visualization and opens one up to the face by way of the non-visibility of speech. On the phone, the voice is concentrated and undiluted. This is why I dislike the video call. It defeats the purpose of the phone call. This is obviously fine in certain situations, but the visualization involved in it can become an obstacle on the road to friendship. The video call can trigger anxiety in the form of camera shyness, and this makes one overly conscious of oneself and diverts attention away from the speech of the other. I also realize that there are important differences between the classic telephone and the smartphone. They are not the same medium, but the latter can come to function very much like the former. One crucial difference is that you can walk around with the smartphone, whereas you are forced to be stationed in one place with the old phone. This ability to move around while talking can be a good and a bad thing. For one, walking around can cause you to become distracted, but it can also help one get used to having long talks. In a weird way, walking can initially serve as a buffer and gives you an excuse to get off the phone. Oh, sorry, I'll have to call you back. However, if this proceeds, then it becomes a problem. I do recommend laying on the couch while having a phone conversation because of how it makes things less distracting. Another problem with the smartphone is the constant interruptions it entails, e.g. message notifications. If you start using social media while conversating, then the conversation breaks down. Despite all of this, the smartphone can still undergo a becoming telephone. That is, it can be used in the way the classic phone was. In large part, I owe my new friendship, the one I just mentioned above, to the way we turned our smartphones into telephones. As we would lose ourselves in conversation, all of the social media apps and notifications withdrew from our awareness. Yes, they're still there, but you begin to not even notice them. In fact, the smartphone itself, like the telephone, withdraws from consciousness and the voice of the other takes center stage. The extreme exposure to another person's infinity can actually cause anxiety, but that's the price one must pay to forge meaningful friendships. As chit-chat disappears, the other begins to reveal things that might very well disturb you, and you might end up becoming repulsed by that person. You might never want to speak to him ever again, or you might end up making a friend for life. There is risk involved here. Sharing the intimate and personal details of one's life is a form of gift exchange. Some gifts you love and some you hate, but this type of risky gift exchange is better than the safe and scripted interactions coded into social media. Boomers and Xers give millennials a lot of shit, but I think much of this criticism is totally unfair. The older generations, as well as the millennials themselves, do not realize what has just happened in terms of our media milieu. We are currently living through the beginning of a third paradigm shift in the structure of communication, which is necessarily a revolution in the structure of our lives, minds, bodies, relationships, worlds, etc. James A. Dewar and Pinghua Ong discuss this in their article, The Cultural Consequences of Printing and the Internet, contained in Agent of Change, Print Culture Studies, after Elizabeth L. Eisenstein. And Emily Podest helpfully summarizes their position in her recent Medium post. More recently, James A. Dewar and Pinghua Ong have noted that the many-to-many communication made possible by social media represented only the third paradigm shift in the history of physical media. The first shift was the emergence of the one-to-one communication of language. The second was the one-to-many paradigm of the printing press. In each case, dramatic changes to how knowledge is stored, retrieved, and manipulated had a cascade effect that lasted decades and even centuries, as populations adjusted to the paradigm shift. During each of these periods, Dewar and Ong argue, a range of unintended consequences has, at times, come to dominate intended ones. The full contours of the unintended consequences of social media will continue to reveal themselves until long after my lifetime and yours. Millennials have been hurled into an entirely revolutionary media paradigm without anyone to turn to on how to gain a basic sense of familiarity and orientation with what has just started to unfold. This is why making close friendships is so important right now. Young people need each other in order to begin to cope with this brand new many-to-many form of communication, which has a strong tendency towards the erasure of the face of the other. The face is blurred by the franticness of social media and by the shift into a new media environment. This is why the work of McLuhan and Levinas can be of such guidance at the moment. The preference for texting and hesitance to talk on the phone is merely a symptom of a deeper problem. The desire to ward off the presence and depth of the other. Talking on the phone is certainly not a cure-all for the loneliness millennials are struggling with. But it does have a structural difference from texting that facilitates intimacy, closeness, vulnerability, etc. This is not merely a generational preference on my part, but instead a crucial structural feature of the phone itself. There is a strange paranoia concerning the other in the digital society. The digital superego silently screams at us. Interact with the other at all costs, but always from a safe distance. Do not get too close. I fully reject this injunction. I say take the risk of completely losing yourself in the dangerous other, of having the other turn your world upside down. Let's resurrect the phone call. Dare to see the face. Dare to encounter the other. Dare to be a friend. There we go. Clap, 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 clap. Clap, 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 clap. I like this medium feature. You gotta show you really like it to give them the full like. All right. Anyway, there we go. If anyone from TU or elsewhere makes it this far, thanks for listening to me, and feel free to reach out, please, if you would like to call and have any kind of phone call or do another reading like this together, and I'll be on via Discord forum too, but we can figure out the times and everything like that.